Welcome to Revolution Against Evolution. I'm your host, Doug Sharp.
Your co-host Rich Gear here as well. And Doug, we have a very special guest here today. You want to introduce Dan to us? Because I'm really excited about this presentation he's going to be giving.
Well, Dan Biddle is from an organization called Genesis Apologetics, and I think we connected through the International Association of Creation. I've met Stephen Craig Castro. He has his ministry in Florida where he tries to organize connections between all the different creation organizations. And so this is the first time that Dan is hooked up with us, and I want to introduce him to you. Dan, give us a little bit of a background of what your ministry is all about, and then introduce your subject for today.
Sounds great. Thanks again for having me. Our ministry is really about reaching today's youth on the phone, where they spend an average of 7 hours a day. So we're on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube because we want to try to reach the next generation where they're at. And so we produce a lot of different video shorts that take complex creation topics and breaks them down to like 15-second videos or 1 minute videos or maybe 3 minute videos to whet their appetite to bring them in to see longer form content about all things creation related. Genesis 1 to 11 is really the bracket of scripture we like to stay in, covering things like creation, the flood, dinosaurs, topics like that. And then myself, I was converted to become a young earth creationist about 15 years ago. I've been a Christian since I was 11, been walking with Jesus since about age 17, but I was undeclared on origins until my early 40s. And then I had an amazing, eye-opening experience where the Lord kind of changed my life and opened my heart when I was willing to submit under scripture. Then I took a tour through geology and looked at dinosaurs and have never turned back since. God really used those two things, geology and dinosaurs, to overwhelmingly convince me that Earth is young and these creatures died out in a flood. So it's a little bit about me and our ministry.
Was there a particular thing that really led to the real epiphany, or was it a gradual thing that unfolded for you?
It was about a 3 month process. I am
Okay.
a research guy. I spent about 20 years as a testifying expert in state and federal court cases dealing with data research and statistics. So I'm a hard to convince kind of a guy. I'm very science minded. So I spent about 90 days. I spent thousands of dollars on books and DVDs. I flew to Montana. I flew to Canada. And some of the things that were most incredibly convincing to me are probably in the top 10 I'll be covering tonight in my talk.
Okay.
So your talk tonight, what is the title that you're going to give your talk tonight?
Yes, I think we're gonna call it the top 10 evidences for Noah's flood. Our movie that came out in the theaters last year in about 1,000 theaters. We probably covered 20 different topics in that movie, but tonight we're going to take just the top 10 and review those topics of what I believe are some of the most convincing evidence-based topics about Noah's flood. For me, when you spent I spent the first 40 years of my life really not knowing if Genesis was true, and then I understood it to be true in my 40s. You can't unsee it, you guys. It's like unscrambling eggs, just can't be done. It's an amazing epiphany that happens. So let's just jump right in. So a little bit more about our ministry. I think our channel has like 31 million views now, about a quarter million subscribers. We get about 5,000 views a day. We've got a pretty good following on social media like Facebook and Instagram, and that's really where we're trying to go because we have a heart and a passion towards reaching the next generation, and the next generation is really on their phones. It's how they assemble their knowledge network a lot of the times. We also produce a lot of different movies. We have one called Genesis Impact, which is a comparison between what's taught in natural history museums and the biblical worldview. That's one of my favorites. We also have one called Foundations that shows just how important it is to raise kids under a biblical creation worldview. That's the Foundations movie. All of these can be viewed free from our website. And then we have two primary programs for students. One that's really aimed towards 5th to 10th grade students called debunkevolution.com, where we take the top 10 topics of evolution that are taught in like life science and biology classes and address them from a scientific and a biblical worldview. And then if you have a student that's getting ready to launch off to college and they're in 10th or 11th grade or higher, go to our 7myths.com program where we preemptively prepare them for the 7 false teachings they're likely to encounter when they go away to college, even some Christian colleges. And again, both these programs are free. Of course, the topic of gender, sex, and marriage is a hot topic. About 7% of people in the United States right now identify on some continuum other than a binary perspective of gender. And so we feel that's a very important topic. We address it from a very biblical and scientific standpoint. We have a book about Noah's flood that is a complement to our movie that came out in about 1,000 theaters last year. The movie's called The Ark in the Darkness, and we have a book by that same name. And then we just covered the Genesis 6 giants topic recently. Was there a giant problem in the Americas? There's about 885 reports that we found of giants, quote, giants that were found in America between 7 and 9 feet tall. And we believe that this giant phenomenon that was happening in North America was mirroring the giant phenomenon that David was experiencing, as outlined in the book of 2 Samuel, about that same time period, about 3,000 years ago. So, fascinating book. And then along with that book, we've also got a book on thunderbirds and flying dragons that just came out last week. And then a book called The Wallam Olam, which is a Native American retelling of many different Genesis related themes. And that book is going to be the scholarly work that underpins our next movie, which is coming out, which is called Out of Babel. So if
Are
you
you
want to,
hanging
yeah,
out with Ian Juby on Wallam Olam there?
Ian, you know what? I think that name sounds familiar. Is he the one who published the book on the Red Record? Ian?
I know that he actually works with Native Americans, I mean the Native Canadians tribes in Ontario where he's from.
I need to get his contact information. That would be great. That book is getting sold every week. There's copies flying off the shelves. For some reason, it's a very, very hot topic because I think people are waking up that if Genesis really happened, the Native Americans are going to have an echo of the Genesis account. Of course, they came
Yes.
over from Babel, and if it really happened, as we know, they would have known about giants, creation, the flood, all kinds of things, Babel dispersion. And if you go back to the European records of the 1700s and 1800s, when the Jesuits and the Europeans were showing up in America and documenting the Native American histories, it's not some, it's most Native American tribes knew about creation, the flood, Satan, demons, God, the whole bit. There's an incredible overlap between Genesis and Native American origin stories.
And I've read that places where much of the really lasting conversions or significant conversions were when the missionaries talked Genesis first, and then they recognized their stories. Then they could lead them to Jesus, because
Great
if you
point.
started out with the New Testament, they had they didn't have any commonality. But when you start with the Genesis, you could go to the fall and all that stuff that they had remembrances of those things, and then you
Yes.
could go into the redemption act. But people oftentimes tried to get the cart before the horses, the saying goes. They talk about Christ, but it was the ones who would talk about Genesis first that seemed to have a lot more success, as I understand it, as I've read
So,
reports about
so
that.
true. It's 26 tribes had stories about giants, and the way that they regarded the giants was very much the same as David and his fighting men going, chasing around, fighting and annihilating the giant tribe. So it's the giant thing, it's the flood thing, creation, Babel, and the Wallimolam even reports Ice Age creatures living with man, as well as the Ice Age and how they were living during the Ice Age. So the overlaps is undeniable between the Native American history and Genesis. It's great, great stuff. Good. So I'll continue on. One of our other books, probably our most well-known book, is the answers to the top 50 questions about Genesis creation and Noah's flood. We made this book by answering the questions that we get asked most frequently through our web channels. and that can be downloaded free from our website. Then, of course, we have our Genesis Apologetics mobile app, which can be downloaded on Android or iTunes, and that's also free. We have over 100,000 people that have downloaded that app to put the creation truth right on their phones. And that is our next movie. You can just go to outofbabel.com. It's already been filmed. It's in post-production right now, and it should be coming out sometime next year. This is going to be fun because I'm in the lineage of the elder William Brewster on the Mayflower. He was my 14th great grandfather. I'm in the Elder Brewster Society, and it's really fun learning about what the Pilgrims knew about Genesis and how they regarded it, and looking at their Geneva Bible and all that stuff. So what we do in this movie is we have a campfire talk between the Pilgrims, featuring Bradford and Brewster and other theologians at the time, meeting with Native Americans when they bring out their history and the Pilgrims bring out their history through the Bible. And they have a campfire talk, and they compare and contrast stories, and they both come away overwhelmed at how similar the accounts are. So it should be a really fun movie. Should be coming out. Yep,
Yeah.
6 to 9 months we're hoping, but it's not out till it's out. But that's the hope.
Yeah.
We're about 90% the way done with it, which is just great. They still have the visual effects scenes to put in. And then, of course, that movie is a succession after the Flood movie. We did this movie in partnership with Sevenfold Films. You can just go to noahsflood.com and see that movie for free now. It's probably the most exhaustive apologetic on Noah's Flood that's ever hit the theaters. I love the movie and a lot of the different truths we're going to extract and share in summary form today. We also give out all this stuff free to educators. We've got books and student books and a color book and a 43-minute version and a 58-minute version. We want educators to train their students that Noah's Flood is real history, so we make all these tools available free to schools and educators. So let's just jump in now to many of the viewers tonight. Some of these things might be basic overviews of Noah's Flood, but I will get into some more advanced topics, I assure you, as we go. But I think, as you guys know, the date range for Noah's Flood is under the Masoretic date. It would be around 2348. There's some things you can do with Abraham's lifespan that might put it as far as 2518 under the classic Masoretic perspective. Then there are those who have adopted the Septuagint timeline, which believe that that could put the flood back to about 3200 BC. But either way, you can bracket the flood as being right in that timeline. I have no problem with either one of these dates. So that would be like the upper maximum. And then the interesting thing about the flood is if you just take one chapter of scripture, just take Luke chapter 3, you can take Jesus Christ himself, who lived 2,000 years ago, and walk through his life 4,000 years back through 77 patriarchs, going through the line of David and Abraham and Noah, all the way back to Adam. And Luke chapter 3 ends with these words. It says, Adam, who was the son of God. So there's an uninterrupted connected chain that goes straight back from Jesus through David, Abraham, Noah, all the way back to Adam. And it says Adam was the son of God, like the son of God breathed into existence out of nothing. It doesn't say he was the son of a hominin race of 10,000 people or Homo habilis or Lucy or anything like that. God's first son was Adam, and he was breathed out of nothing, made out of the dust. So there we have it, young earth right in the New Testament. And of course, this is reflected back in Genesis chapters 5 and 10 as well. But that's a timeline for the flood. Well, what about how long the flood itself lasted? Well, it was a 371-day process. The ark didn't even get buoyant until about day 40. And then the waters peaked at day 150. The waters were receding for about the next 150 days, then earth dried out for about 70 days. There are some different perspectives that can be taken about this timeline, but it's interesting when Noah records his experience of the flood, he kept a journal. It's the longest description of any single event in the entirety of Scripture. There's over 2.5 chapters dedicated to just this one event, and he kept a diary about when he let out the bird, when the bird came back, when the next bird came out, when the waters rose, when they stopped, when the earth dried out. We have a historical event here recorded in Scripture, and the flood lasted for over 370 days. Here's a graphical overview that shows the flood process. So we've got the flooding, the ark becoming buoyant about day 40, the peak or the zenith at day 150. And then we have the water retreating off of the earth, first in sheets and then in channelized cuts. So we have the flooding stage and we have the retreating stage. Did you know that every other Middle Eastern account that echoes the true biblical flood account in Genesis has many of them do have timelines, but their timelines are ridiculous. Like Epic of Gilgamesh is a 7-day flood. This is actually feasible, and it's enough time to generate the different layers and the strata that we see. It's enough to deposit all the different types of geological strata packages that are all over the earth. You look at the Sloss mega sequences, which we'll cover briefly tonight. It's plenty of time to catastrophize the earth and leave a worldwide depositional evidence of the flood. But that's a general overview of the steps that happened. And then, of course, the number one question that's asked about the flood is, how'd you fit all those species on the ark? In fact, I was debating an old earther once in front of high school students, and he took the stage, and the first thing he said was, don't listen to anything Dr. Biddle's going to say because there's no way you can put 4.5 million species on the ark. He thought that was case closed, game over. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you just really don't have any understanding of what the creationists are touting here, because you don't have to take all the different species on the ark. If you just look at the dog kind or the horse kind or the chicken kind or the bear kind, you'll quickly can see, if you begin paring back the animal tree and going from species to kind, well, you can look at like the Canis lupus kind, or going back to the wolf. Well, there's 339 breeds of dogs, but they can all go back to a wolf-like creature. There's 336 breeds of horses, but do you know that today all breeds of horses are still interfertile? You can take the smallest horse and the biggest horse, and they're still interfertile. Bears are interesting. The Ursidae family, there's 8 species in the bear family, 5 of which are still interfertile. You can take a brown bear, could breed with a polar bear, can breed with a black bear. So they're still interfertile. And of course, you've got 68 breeds of chickens. They can still all interbreed. And you can see quickly, if you begin paring back all the different breeds or species and just get to the branches of the tree, answers in Genesis perspective is that you only need thousands of animals on board the ark to reproduce all the different varieties that we see today. So there's really no hurdle we have to push back to try to get all of the life forms we see today on the ark just thousands of years ago. So evidence number one, this is one of my favorites, is flood legends everywhere. This is one of my favorite books. Nick LaGuardia came out with this book. He actually just came out with the second edition of his book. It's titled Echoes of Ararat, a collection of over 300 flood legends from just North and South America. Now, in his second book, he expands it out and goes into all kinds of different countries. But the title of this book says it all. The echo of the flood event, the echo of Ararat, and where the ark landed, it echoes throughout all these different cultures. And you can go to the base of the ziggurat where the Tower of Babel was. You can zoom up from that, and every single one of these yellow dots that you can see is a documented oral or written history of a worldwide flood account. And when you start spinning the globe around and you look at Thailand and Vietnam, look at that cluster of flood stories. They're everywhere. You can zoom in here and see each one of these different dots is a culture, a people group, a tribe that have carried an echo, a story of Noah's flood. If you go to South America, it's chock full, and look at the distribution there. But the North American, Native American tribes is what's really incredible, because I've read many of these. And you guys, when you start drilling into the specifics and what they called Noah, the fact that he had his family, where he landed on the top of a mountain, if he was in a canoe, he let go of a bird. Sometimes it's a white bird. He had all the animals with him. It is so obvious when you read these stories that they carried with them probably over the Bering Strait, a very clear retelling of the flood account, and then it distributed everywhere around the Americas. If you look at the ancient Near East, same kind of thing. You have the original historical flood account. Then you have 6 primary ancient Near Eastern flood accounts. You got the Eridu tablet, Sumerian Kings List, Enuma Elish, the Atrahasis, Simmons Ark tablet, and the Epic of Gilgamesh. Now it's interesting. The Epic of Gilgamesh is actually required curriculum in many secular colleges around America today. And I think it's because they want to attach that epic along with the Bible and in order to discount them both as mythical. So they'll
Yeah.
somehow say, well, study the Epic of Gilgamesh, and if that was obviously fanciful, well, then the biblical account must be also. So, but when you look at these different types of ancient Near Eastern accounts about the flood, did you know that they all generate from an original source of truth, which is the Genesis history, and as they travel through history, they get more and more mythical. Almost never in history do we see it in the reverse, where you have a myth that's going to tend to get more mythical. No, they always start based upon a real historical event, and the more they're told and retold, like the telephone game, they become more exaggerated and more mythical. But what's interesting is that if you were to look at those ancient Near Eastern flood accounts, they all have many common themes. Like there's a god or gods who's going to bring judgment. They're going to choose a person with his family and the animals to get saved. There's going to be a vessel with certain specifications. They're going to survive the flood. The birds are going to find some dry land, and then they're going to make a sacrifice to God after. So my question is that if the biblical account isn't the real account, then why do all these other accounts have the same basic elements that are in Scripture? To me, is overwhelmingly confirming that the biblical account is the real one. And it gets even more incredible when you start looking at the at written languages. Did you know that you could grab a sixth grade history book and they will admit in a sixth grade history book, human writing only goes back 5 to 6,000 years? Well, if you look at ancient Greece and the Hittites and the Egyptians, the Sumerians, all these different written languages disappear from the face of the earth just about the same time we would put Noah's flood. That's amazing confirmatory evidence. And in fact, when we speak with the head curator of cuneiform collection at the British Museum itself, and we ask him this tough question, we say to him, what is the furthest back you can go in human writing where you can triangulate it and know that it's valid writing that can be dated? And he's like, that's easy, 1500 BC. That's as far back as we can go where we know they were writing down things on cuneiform because they were watching a certain volcano blow up and they recorded it. So without that type of triangulation, they're going to be relying on carbon dating to try to date these cuneiform writings to go back further. And we all know that carbon dating has got a big standard error of prediction to it, especially the further back that you go. So it's no surprise to me that human writing vanishes from the face of the planet just about the same time we put Noah's flood. Very good confirmatory evidence here. Evidence number two, when you look at the original flood account and you compare it to the ancient Near Eastern accounts, it's the only one that makes sense because we know that God himself gave the proportions of the ark, how to build it structurally, the dimensions, the number of stories, how to code it inside and outside with pitch. And really smart people have taken these dimensions, like in the early 90s, they took it to the Chrysos Ship Research Center in Korea and tested it against several other models, and it proved out to be the best dimensions that you could put for a seaborne ship that just had to stay out there and float with respect to comfort, strength, and stability. And when you start testing it against circular shaped arcs or cube shaped arcs, it becomes very obvious that the dimensions of the biblical ark is the only one that's really going to work. It took, between 55 and 75 years to build it. It was over 500 feet long. It was in the ocean for about a year, and it was definitely seaworthy. When you contrast that to the Epic of Gilgamesh arc, which was a cube that was 200 feet tall on each side. It took only a week to build. It was only in the ocean for a week. It definitely wasn't seaworthy. It would have toppled around in the ocean. When you contrast that with the 7-to-1 length to width ratio of Noah's Ark, obviously we have a ship that works, and the Epic of Gilgamesh would not. When you start ramping it up in a storm, this is hydrophysics estimations, you would have seen how it would have toppled and all these animals would have died. But when you take the ark and simulate it under really strong storm conditions, it will not capsize. It'll stay buoyant, and it has an incredible ability to go from one side to the other and not topple and not spin over. So great evidence there also. Let's move on to evidence number 3. This for me is the coffee talk. If you want to convince someone in 5 minutes about Noah's flood, take this line of reasoning. This for me, you could grab it and run as the leading proof for Noah's flood. It's this. How do you bury 14 states and parts of 3 countries with dead dinosaurs without a worldwide flood? In the middle of this formation is an area called the Morrison Formation. It's a 600,000-mile swath of land that touches 13 states, and it's filled with millions upon millions of land creatures, but they're buried with fish. So how do you take 13 states, bury land animals with fish together, and jumble them all up? It takes a worldwide flood. So this area here is actually 1,800 miles long, 1,000 miles wide. It's 1,000,000 square miles total, and it's stuffed full of dead dinosaurs. If we zoom into just one of the formations in here, it's a Jurassic formation called the Morrison Formation. We can zoom in and we'll take a cross-sectional cut of Morrison, Colorado to see how thick this mud layer is. It's really amazing. This is a cross-sectional cut of the Morrison Formation, and you guys, it's 300 feet thick. So the next time you take a skeptic to coffee, just ask them, okay, well, how do you bury 13 states worth of dead dinosaurs, 600,000 square miles, in 300 feet of mud? It's a pancake that's 300 feet thick, and it spans 600,000 miles, and it's stuffed with every single known species of dinosaurs in the entire Jurassic. And they're all buried together at the same time. Do it without a flood, can't be done. When you start zooming in more closely and looking just the extent of how big this is, you can fly in a Boeing 747, or you can put in the Empire State Building just to see how thick that is, and to imagine it's spanning over 13 states, you guys, and it's over 300 feet thick, and it's stuffed full of dead dinosaurs. And here's a picture of all of the different species that are found in just that Morrison layer. So you got the big ones, you got sauropods, you got theropods, ankylosauruses. All these different species are stuffed in that area. In fact, there's about 2,000 fossil occurrences or massive bone beds, 37 genera of dinosaurs, 364 species of plants and animals, and that's just what we've found so far. And only parts of the Morrison Formation are exposed. The rest of it's still down deep, hundreds of feet under the soil. So it's quite obvious that there was a worldwide flood. That's the macro big picture. Now let's go into the microscopic little picture and look at what I think today in our generation is probably the best clincher case for young Earth and for dinosaurs and for Noah's flood. Here's a list of over 120 peer-reviewed studies that have substantiated 16 different varieties of bioorganic materials that are found in ancient bones. And 50 of these 120 articles are dealing with just dinosaurs across the Mesozoic. So Triassic, Jurassic, Cretaceous, 50 different peer-reviewed science journals, and these are not creationist publications. These are peer-reviewed science journals that are in secular journals, 120 and 50 of them dealing with just dinosaurs. So here's a clip that we put in our movie, licensed from Mark Armitage and the Dinosaur Soft Tissue Research Institute. That's what a Triceratops horn looks like when you demineralize it and you stretch it. You can grab it with forceps and pull it apart, and it's like putty, like gum. It's stretchable. If that was a bone that was really 100 million years old, it shouldn't be any tissue left. You shouldn't be able to pull it or stretch it at all, but yet you can. That's just one example. Mary Schweitzer's done a whole lot of documented work that shows the same stretchability of soft tissues in dinosaurs. In fact, there is pictures of the 16 different types of bioorganic materials. You've got FEX, histones, proteins, collagen, keratin, all these types of things that have no business being in bones, that they're really just hardened rocks that are 100 million years old. But the clincher is the last two that they've found, which is dinosaur cartilage and nerve cells. What is
Wow.
cartilage and nerve cells doing in a dinosaur bone if it's really 100 million years old? You guys, I would say two things. This clinches the case, and secondly, there's no rescuing device anymore. You can't get out of this. Evolutionists are backed into the corner. In fact, I have $1,000 worth of books that I bought spanning over 150 years from really the late 1700s all the way up to when paleontology was started in the 1800s, all the way up to 1950. And do you know what all of those books say from 1950 and back? Literally all of those books say dinosaur bones are hardened rocks. That's what they all say. Maybe 99.9% of them say dinosaur bones are hardened permineralized stones. There's no bioorganics left. But now they can't say that after not, especially not after 122 peer-reviewed science journals that say we're really finding bioorganics that are native to the creatures that they're finding them in. So now there's been a 100% reversal. Now, 0% of paleontologists can say all dinosaur bones are stones. They used to say that, but now they can't say that at all. It's been a 100% flip paradigm. So the evidence is really on our side, but the biggest one that no one can get out of, there's 5 independent studies that have been done studying the half-life, rather the maximum shelf life of collagen, which makes up a lot of the bone because bones are makeup of the hydroxyapatite, which is a hard bone mineral, and then collagen, which makes up, say, 30 or 40% of the bone. And then the bone minerals, the hard part should stay for a long time, but the collagen, the scientists say, should just be decayed. It should go away. It's organic, right? But the 5 different studies that have looked at this have given estimates of the maximum shelf life of collagen, and they land it between 30,000 years and 900,000 years. There's no peer-reviewed science journal out there that's willing to stretch the lifespan of collagen more than 900,000 years. So that's where they're stuck. They won't even give it a million years. But since the about 10 years ago, Mary Schweitzer proved that the collagen that they're finding in bones is organic to the creature at the molecular level. And just last year, they found hydroxyprolone. So now they're really backed in a corner. These bones have to be young. They can't be millions of years old. So if you've got collagen that can only last, say, less than a million years, how in the world is it lasting 65 million years in dinosaur bones? It's certainly just, it's an impossibility. Okay, evidence number 5. We'll keep ripping through these, and then I'll take some Q&A. We're making great progress. Evidence number 5 is a rapid catastrophic burial of dinosaurs mixed with marine life. This is fun. Jack Horner, a very well-known evolutionary-based paleontologist, has got this interesting book called Digging Dinosaurs. But look at the subtitle. It says, "A search that unraveled the mystery of the baby dinosaurs." Well, what's the mystery about baby dinosaurs? Well, he sets it up this way. He says, look, we found a bone bed that stretched out over a mile long, and it was directionally laid down. We found the bones of 10,000 dinosaurs represented by 30 million bone fragments. The big thing is they didn't find any bones of any young dinosaurs. So how do you find a swath of dead dinosaurs that goes for 1.25 miles? 10,000 adult dead Maiasaurus with 30 million bone fragments, and they were all between 9 and 23 feet long. Well, maybe there was a giant flood that was happening, and a big tsunami was about to wipe them all out, and the adults ran for cover, and they left all the little ones behind. 10,000 of them, not a single young. Very, very interesting. And then why is it that when you look at the dinosaurs in museums everywhere, they're always choking and suffocating for air? And they've actually proved that's what they're doing here. They took studies that have been done where they've taken dead chickens or sorry, live chickens and buried them and looked at what happens with their thoracic systems when they're choking for air. When they're dying through asphyxiation, like they're being buried by mud, they start turning backwards like this. Most amazing thing. Evidence number 6. The three products of dinosaurs and marine life, they're buried in mud, sand, and ash. I think this is a very fascinating one. Here is a slide that shows it. Thanks to some AI interesting text here. We've got a dinosaur, and he's being buried in a product, a matrix of mud, sand, and ash. Those three products form a composite that frames where the substance that most dinosaurs are found buried in the middle of America, especially places like Utah. So we need a process, we need a mechanism that could bury those creatures in those three products. And here we have it. Genesis 8:3 says that the water receded from the earth, going forth and returning, and at the end of 150 days, the water decreased. So here we have in the Genesis scripture itself the apparent mechanism of tsunamis coming up, washing back off, coming up, washing back off. And that's exactly what would produce mud, sand, and ash, because catastrophic plate tectonics says that you're going to have the continents splitting apart rapidly at the early stages of the flood. We're going to have the opening of like the mid-Atlantic ridge here. The oceanic ridges are going to be opening up. It's a 40,000-mile linear rift system that goes around the Earth 1.6 times. And it's that very process that's going to be responsible for producing those three products, mud, sand, and ash. Here's what the mid-Atlantic ridge looks like when you take away all the water from the Earth, and we colorized it there. You can see how pronounced that is. That's when the fountains of the Great Deep burst forth, and they left mud, sand, and ash, because when the fountains of Great Deep are spreading out and you've got new seafloor rapidly forming, it's going to spread rapidly, hit the land masses, and then start creating cycles of tsunamis. And then when it subducts underneath the land, it's going to create volcanic hazards along the margins of the continents, spraying forth huge volumes of ash and aerosols, blocking the sun and covering down and blanketing places like Utah. So that's what the subduction is going to look like during the flood. You can have all these volcanics going on, spewing forth ash. It's going to rain down on these dinosaurs. And that's why we find systems like the Independence Dyke Swarm in Southern California, which is 375 miles long, bellowing out 4,000 cubic miles of ash that covers half of America. And when you contrast that to places like Mount St. Helens, that only put out 1/4 cubic mile of ash, but the Independence Dyke Swarm system that blew up during the flood covered half of America with 4,000 cubic miles of ash, including places like the Brushy Basin member, where you have it's 50% made of ash and it covers 4 different states, 200 million square miles. How do you produce dinosaur-bearing strata that's 50% made of ash? The rest is sand and mud, and it covers 200 million square miles. You need a mechanism for that, and the mechanism would be rapidly subducting plates during Noah's flood. Very, very interesting. A 600-mile stretch by about 300 miles long, filled with 50% ash. You need some mechanism to do that. Evolutionists can't explain it, but we can see how the dinosaurs are buried there, and they were killed by the ash that was burying them. Evidence number 7, massive oceanic plates dragged under the continents. Here we have an underground radar that shows the Farallon plate that did in fact subduct underneath North America. You can take a heat scan of it. We can see the old stuff at the bottom, and then it gets cooler as you go on up. We know that that plate subducted underneath North America. That's what was responsible for producing all the ash rapidly like that. This is called the conjugate Shatsky Plateau, was pulled underneath North America bellowing out a lot of those ashes that's coming out and being responsible for burying the dinosaurs in that massive bathtub right in the middle of America.
Hmm.
And then we have the fossil order. I think this is one of the most obvious things with biblical creation. When you look at the fossil order, we have these six packages called the Sauk Tippecanoe, Kaskaskia, then it goes up higher to the Absaroka, and then finally the Zuni package. There are six different major packages. The last one is going to be at the end of the flood and plus some ice age material called the Tejas Formation. But during the flood, you've got the peak all the way up at the Zuni Formation, which is when the dinosaurs finally bought it at the end of the flood. But these six huge packages are stacked one on top of the other right in the middle of America, responsible for, for demonstrating and revealing clearly Noah's flood. When you look at the types of fossils that are in the early Sloss mega sequences, the Sauk is entirely shallow marine. Then you've got the Tippecanoe, which is the next package, same kind of thing, shallow marine, Kaskaskia. Now we're getting up a little bit higher in the flood. The Absaroka, we start bringing in some land creatures, and by the time you get to the peak, the Zuni, you have a lot of the land creatures finally starting to get buried. So in the fossil record, we don't see evolution going from trilobites to these creatures to these creatures. It's not evolution at all. It represents the order of burial during Noah's flood. So we can see those first three layers are mostly marine and shallow marine, followed by the land creatures buried next in the Absaroka and the Zuni. And we can see this in a frequency distribution when you start plotting out the land creatures versus the sea creatures. It's a very, very clear phenomenon where we don't see the land creatures stacking in our frequency chart until you get to the Zuni formation. Then you have all the land creatures finally getting buried. Okay, evidence 9, we've got a couple more and then we'll wrap up and do some Q&A. Evidence 9 is the correlated fossils and oil. This is another great coffee talk, a very succinct discussion here. If you look at America and you want to pull these continents back together, you can see right there in the middle, you have the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, which is where the fountains of the Great Deep broke open. And then on one side of the continent, we can see that shape of the continent. We can go 1,500 miles back to the center and then 1,500 miles to the left, and we can see that notch of that continent and how they would perfectly fit together back as a puzzle piece. They're currently spread apart by about 3,000 miles, and right smack in the middle is the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, which is responsible for pushing them apart. Now, if that happened rapidly, like we know it did, it's going to leave behind a whole bunch of buried flora and fauna in those same regions. And if it's true that it happened, and if it happened rapidly, we would expect to find the same types of creatures on each side of those continents. We wouldn't expect entirely different creatures. We'd expect the same types of creatures to be buried on each side of the continent. And did you know, of course, that's exactly what we find. Each one of these little green dots here on the screen is a massive fossil bone bed, like a fossil graveyard. And when you take this notch from South America here and you fit it right over to this notch, well, did you know that these creatures are the same as these creatures over here? You can run fossil counts and you can see when you run the distributions there, it's the same type of flora and fauna. These were ecosystems that were all living together until the fountain of the Great Deep split, broke them apart, and now the creatures are buried in the mud and sand responsible for their death when these two continents were pushed apart rapidly during the flood. And then, of course, if you look at the oil chemistry, it says the same thing. Isn't it fascinating? If you take chemical signatures of the oil deposits on each side of the matching continents, lo and behold, they shout the same truth. It was the same type of deposits of flora and fauna that was responsible, for when these continents were pushed apart. They are going to be representing the same types of things that was going to be making up the oil chemistry on each side. So you can take these oils and different types of oil has different chemical signatures to them. And if you match the continents back together, they're perfectly correlated. Same types of stuff was buried on each side. And the last one I think is incredible, the receding waters, and that first receded off in sheet flow, then in channelized cuts. The Bible is very clear. It says that God remembered Noah and every living thing and all the animals that were with him on the ark. God made a wind to pass over the earth, and the water subsided. The fountains of the great deep and the windows of heaven were also stopped, and the rain from heaven was restrained. So when that happened, the fountains of the great deep were shut off. There was a cooling effect, and it's going to peel the water back off of the continents, creating a reverse flow like that, first as sheet flow and then in channelized cuts. And that would be a perfect explanation for the Whopper sand that's found in the Gulf of America here, where you have huge amounts of sand, 1,500 feet of it, that was peeled off the continents and deposited in the Gulf. And then you can go to places like Monterey Bay Canyon and see this underwater canyon that's bigger than the Grand Canyon. And it's obviously from erosional cuts from massive runoff that at one time in the past was peeled back off the continent right after the flood. Okay, guys. Well, that is going to conclude my hopefully quick tour
Wow.
of the flood. But I want to conclude with this one slide. Why is this even important? You know, are we splitting hairs? Does it matter what people believe, young Earth versus old Earth? Well, I would argue that if you want to be a Christian who's going to produce good fruit, if you ask a farmer or someone who oversees orchards and looks at trees, they would say, look, it's not the stem, it's not the branch, it's not the bark, it's not the trunk. If you want to have produce good fruit, it's going to be all about the root systems. What are they getting into? What type of nutrients are there? And to have a Christian life that's going to sprout and blossom and be very productive and produce fruit, you're going to have strong roots that go all the way back to Genesis. But what's happening around the country today is the roots of our youth are trying to go down deep and believe in Genesis, but it's being spun off as a metaphor and replaced with ideas like deep time, Charles Darwin, science versus the Bible, or ape to human evolution. We don't want Christians to have sparse trees like this. Psalms 1 is very clear that you have to have trust and belief in Torah. It uses the word law, which is, of course, the Torah, the first five books of the Bible. And whoever meditates on that law and believes in it will be like a tree planted by the waters, whose roots go down deep into the stream and whose leaves will always be green because it's going to be trusting in the origin accounts in Scripture. So with that, guys, I will conclude and would love to get your feedback and questions.
Okay, well, we have about 10 minutes left. Uh, I
Ah,
I
I
will
went a little long.
I'll start off here with a couple of questions. One is early creationist literature had some information about upside down geology, where the fossil layers are not in the order which evolutionists expect. Have you done much investigating into that area and finding mixtures of fossils that do not work according to evolution?
Well, I know there are some fossils that are not in alignment with what used to be called the KT boundary, or the KPG boundary. There are some things that are out of order with that, and I do know in California, which by the way has the messiest geology of any state, I think, there are actually some Jurassic layers on top of Cretaceous, which of course the evolutionists would say is due to resorting. But I would say that geology, especially in California, is incredibly messy. You go to other places and it might be very, very clean, like in Montana. You can have the Hell Creek Formation. The Cretaceous stuff is almost always on the top. But then you're going to have some outcroppings that are going on in some places where the evolutionists would say there's been some resorting. But I've certainly heard about some out of order fossils like that. I think there's probably people that have written books about the out of order fossils, but there's none that really come to my mind. I remember looking at that stuff early on, but I can't say in California you do have some resorting and some things that are stacked out of order and some fossils that might not line up with what people expect.
Well, I document a few of these in my book, Don't Let Your Geology Mess Up Your Theology.
Oh,
One that
great.
comes to my mind is Red Rock Canyon area in Nevada.
Oh,
and Valley of Fire in Nevada. They're 75 miles apart, but the fossil sequence there is on top is Cambrian, then Jurassic, Triassic, Permian
is that right?
in
That's a reason I got to
both
get your
different
book.
parts. And so it's also interesting that there's a spot in Nevada just east of Las Vegas. It's called Frenchman Mountain, where it's got the entire geologic column on its side with the Precambrian on top, and it's almost tipped over so it follows the sequence horizontally. And so it's
Wow.
kind of a neat, and so this is in between these two different areas, and it's pretty fascinating. We've also been to Glacier National Park, where the top layer is Precambrian and the bottom layer is Cretaceous.
I
Uh,
really need to get your book. This is fantastic. Yeah.
a lot of these things were known by early creationists, and I think it really shows that deep time really doesn't have a possibility, and but if you look at the evidence.
I'm going to get your book. That's fantastic. I'm so thankful you documented that.
And there's a lot of other things like where if you go to the dinosaur footprints at Tuba City, you can find human tracks in the same formation. Uh,
In Tuba City?
yeah, Tuba City
Yeah.
outside of the Grand Canyon.
Is that in your book?
Yes, it is, and I document some of the ones that we found.
Oh
Uh,
my gosh.
and
I had no idea. That's one I haven't heard of.
And so there's a lot of interesting things that we've found that we like to track down some of these out of place artifacts and out of place rock layers that don't fit the geology narrative that you find in
That's
the
great.
geology textbooks.
Well, count me in. I'm a book customer.
All
I
right.
will get that. That's fantastic. Thank you.
I want to get some of your books too. What
Great.
was that one? The Wallum, what did you call
The
it? The
Wallam
Canadian?
Olam, WALAMOLUM.
Yeah, that free package thing. I got to order that
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can go there on the website and download it or buy it. Yeah, that's a fun book. It was really fun doing that research.
What's your website again for the audience?
Genesis Apologetics, and you can find the Wallam Olam book there.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
The other thing I was going to ask you, I know we got short of time. When we were interviewing Joe last week, he was having the talk about getting the dinosaur DNA. He
Yeah.
says we're gonna to the trick is to figure out stuff that we know of that probably is not dinosaur DNA, but he said we don't really have it yet. I'm asking the question because I'm ignorant of this. Does collagen can you get DNA from collagen? I mean, that's stretchy tissue, or is that not a DNA ability to get out of that? I'm just curious because that comes out of a triceratops horn. If you could get it out of that, it would seem to me that would give you some DNA evidence, but I don't know.
Uh, well, the experts that I know in this field who are seeking dinosaur DNA want to go after the brain cases and skulls of dinosaurs because in
Oh,
some places the occipital area is where there's a three times concentration of DNA molecules in those specific areas, and they may be more preserved as well.
oh, that's fascinating. So
Yeah, the
I
brain
can't wait to see
case.
more on that. Yeah.
It's called uh, press precipice bone, something like that. It starts with a P. Yeah, but it's the inside of the brain case around the eye socket. The denser parts of the bone in some pockets there they have three times the concentration of DNA as other parts of the bone. And some people would argue that you want the fresh bones. Other people would say you want the mineralized bones because they're snapshot and a little bit frozen, so to speak. So they might have better preservation characteristics. So yeah, there's a lot of study going on with that right now.
Yeah, but DNA is organic. How would you get that out of a mineralized bone? You know what I'm saying? I don't understand that.
They would say that if the mineralization has happened on the crusty outside of the bone, like a lot of
Oh, I
the
see.
Cretaceous material that you get is got a red ionization on the outside. There's some ferric oxide stuff going on the outside, but sometimes
Okay.
in the middle, they're just organic bones still. Yeah.
To me, that's a major thing that you got unfossilized bones that are supposedly 65 to 225 million years old. Well, however, the Edmontosaurus and those duck-bill dinosaurs, a lot of them up in Canada, they're not mineralized. I go, how do these bones last that long?
And that's even being admitted in secular literature. It's very clear a lot of the bones are unmineralized. You talk with collectors, and they're like, "Oh yeah, most of the stuff in the Cretaceous is not heavily mineralized. Some of it is. I've seen completely mineralized bones with lots of replacement, but most of the stuff you're going to be getting out of the Hell Creek Formation or the Cretaceous layers in the middle of America, a lot of it's not heavily mineralized at all. You take the bone, ship it off to a microscopy lab, they'll run SEM analysis on it, and we'll come back hydroxyapatite. It'll show you the phosphorus, calcium, magnesium, bone mineral, bone mineral, bone mineral.
Wow.
Now, Ian Juby was telling us a while back as he was helping the Big Valley Creation Museum in Alberta get started, is a lot of quite a number of bone fragments, unfossilized bone fragments, were found in that formation that, like the Royal Tyrrell Museum has up in Alberta, uh,
Yes.
in that particular fossil bed. They're finding some unfossilized bones there.
The founder of the Royal Trail Museum admits most bones they find are still bone. That's straight from Peter Drucker.
That's funny because for I see when I was growing up, you just thought it was all mineralized, all of it were fossils, and it reminds me of an old friend of ours. He's passed away now, but I don't know it's not original to him, but he said, "Well, your prejudice allows you what you can see."
Mm,
In other words, they thought these were millions of years old, so nothing. You couldn't have soft tissue, you couldn't have blood cells, you couldn't have unmineralized bones. Now we're seeing it all.
yep. We
Would
have a video on dinosaur soft tissue that shows I believe his name is Ian also being interviewed about why didn't anyone expect this? And they come out clearly and admit like no one was looking because we all
correct,
were set underneath the paradigm of millions of years. No one even
right? Millions
thought
of
that this
years.
stuff would come out. Yeah,
Well,
good.
it's the same thing with carbon 14, finding them in coal and diamonds. They would never look
Yeah,
for it,
they would never
you
look
know?
for it. So true. That's
Now, one
great.
thing we did in 2007 was I went with one of our crew members to the Joggins fossil beds in Nova Scotia, where the fossil trees are found extending up through several strata, and the whole side of the cliffs that are in the Bay of Fundy are sort of tilted on an angle, and it looks like it was all a big block that was raised up and then planed off on the top. And so
Wow.
it's a pretty amazing spot where it just shows the power of deposition of the rock layers with with the vegetation being buried within it, extending up through several layers, and you can see the fossil cliffs eroding away, exposing more of these fossils in these coal beds, and it's just kind of amazing.
It is amazing. You guys, when your eyes have been opened, the flood is geologically the most obvious thing you could ever imagine, and it's worldwide. And the
Yes.
dinosaurs are just an add-on. The fact that they're buried in flood layers is just so obvious that there was a worldwide flood.
Now, people will ask, why did the dinosaurs die out? And
Yeah, of
and
course, our take is that they didn't. Representatives were brought aboard the ark, and then they turned into what we know as dragons. Probably dying out around in the 1500s, but the dragon myths and legends are in every single major people group around the world as long as written history has been recorded. And that's not an exaggeration. Those two things are true. Every major people group, and as long as things has been recorded, you've got legacies and histories of these giant lizard dragon creatures going around, like cave drawings and carvings and oral histories. Yeah, they're everywhere. please go to our website, download our free resources, genesisapologetics.com, and would love to answer any of your questions. So thanks again for having me.
Thanks so much for coming on.